So my name is Caterina Marquez. I'm a senior research fellow at London South Bank University. I'm an IOR trustee, and I'm leading the TICR project. So as you can see on the screen, TICR stands for Transport, Industrial and Commercial Refrigeration. So this is a research project funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And we are a consortium of 7 organizations. So it includes London South Bank University, the Institute of Refrigeration, STAR Technical Solutions, and a few other partners. So today's talk is focused on cold stores. And Lisa, if you had move over to next slide, please. So this is the project scope. We're going to do a series of TICR talks. This is the second one, and each talk is going to be focused on a specific sector. So we are researching into transport refrigeration road units, chemical and pharmaceuticals, food and drink, data centers was our previous TICR talk in October, so you can listen to it online. And the retail talk is going to be next week, and today we'll focus on cold stores. So Lisa, if you press twice, then we can see the rest of the slide. So overall, the project is looking at supporting decarbonization and innovation strategies across all these 6 sectors. So if you press again, you can see all the project work streams, which is first we'll determine carbon emissions from refrigeration in these sectors. We'll develop roadmaps that will guide the industry on how to decarbonize. We'll develop benchmarks that would allow for comparison between different sites, and we'll develop resources for end users and installers. And finally, this is a project funded by government, so we'll look at what policy interventions can really support the industry to get to net zero, and we'll be engaging with the industry throughout the project so that whatever we proposed in terms of policy, it has the industry backing. So that's the goal, and we'll be engaging throughout the project. So we are about 1 year in, we still have 1 year to go, so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to input into the project. So if we move to the next slide. One more. Thank you. Excellent. So we have a live project website. It's called netzerorefrigeration.uk. So this is where we'll be publishing all the project materials. So information about the roadmaps, the benchmarks, the guidance documents will all be published on this website. And if we go to the next slide. So we have a live survey. Really the objective here is to identify what are the key priorities for maintenance, design and training. You can see the link here, and I believe the link has been posted in the chat, so it'd be fantastic if you can complete the survey. That would really support the project, and it will really identify where is more important to put the focus on. And finally, last slide. So this is the TICR team. You can see all the partners here, and you'll hear more shortly from Dermot from STAR Technical Solutions that will tell you the results of the site surveys into cold stores. And Garrett from LSPU will tell you how we estimated direct and indirect emissions from cold stores. So I believe it's over to Garrett now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caterina. So we'll just swap over to Gareth Davis from London South Bank University, who's going to go through carbon emissions in the cold store sector. So Gareth, if you'd just like to put yourself in presentation mode and start at the beginning of presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Can you see my screen?
That's all perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right. Right. My name's Gareth Davis. I'm a senior research fellow at London South Bank University, and I've been looking at estimating the emissions profile for the cold store sector. So cold stores are mainly used for food and drink industries, but about 11% are used in other areas, pet food, funeral care, horticulture, pharmaceutical products. The Cold Chain Federation have suggested there are 1,131 cold stores in the UK, as shown on the map. They've also estimated that the chilled frozen food industry in the UK is worth around £19 billion and over 100,000 people employed. So it's a significant economic sector of the UK. There are about 450 large cold stores operated by Cold Chain Federation members, but if there are 1,131 in the UK, that means there's about 680 outside of the Cold Chain Federation, operated outside. There are, of the Cold Chain Federation cold stores, they represent about 40.8 million cubic meters of volume, and the cold stores are around 96,000 cubic meters each. Now, the strategy we've used to look at cold store emissions, this is the boxes in green are the data sources we've used. First, at the top right is literature sources, and at the bottom right, CryoHub. That was a EU project which involved collecting cold store volumes, and then the Valuation Office Agency collect data on all types of commercial premises, including the cold store sector, for taxation purposes, and but it includes floor areas for chilled and frozen stores, and so which can be converted to volumes, and with that together, the volumes together with a specific energy consumption value, which is used as the main parameter for assessing the energy efficiency of cold stores, can be used to estimate the electricity consumption. And from the electricity consumption, we can derive the Scope 2 indirect emissions and the Scope 1 direct emissions, as shown here. The climate change agreement schemes are operated in many sectors of industry, including cold stores, and the cold store CCA scheme is managed by the Cold Chain Federation on behalf of the Environment Agency, and about 450 cold stores are covered by the agreement. Now, the Environment Agency publish sector energy consumptions and emissions, and for the cold stores in 2020, they reported that the primary energy consumption was 3.63 terawatt hours per annum, and which would equate to a final electrical energy consumption of 1.45 terawatt hours and Scope 2 emissions of 0.33 megatons. The total volume of the 450 facilities in the CCA is 40.8, as we saw earlier, and so that from that you can calculate the average specific energy consumption for the UK is currently 35.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter per annum. SEC values can, of course, be calculated for individual stores, and you can then compare them with average or best practice values to evaluate your energy performance. The CryoHub data, which was an EU funded project which investigated cryogenic energy storage in refrigerated warehouses, and chilled and frozen volume data for 257 cold stores was collected. Then, using an average SEC per unit volume value for values for chilled, frozen and mixed stores collected from survey data, the annual energy consumption for each store could be calculated. The Valuation Office Agency data includes chilled and frozen store floor areas, but not height and volume data, although I think they may collect height and volume data, but it's not in the public domain at the moment. A total of 350 cold stores separate to the CryoHub cold stores were identified from the VOA dataset, and two approaches were used to estimate the annual energy consumption. First, using SEC per unit area values, which were obtained from the BEES storage sector report. BEES stands for Building Energy Efficiency Survey. It was carried out by BEIS in 2016, and they could be used to calculate annual energy consumption. And then the other approach was to convert the areas to volumes using a mean height of 9.3 meters, which was obtained from the CryoHub data, and then using the SEC per unit volume values again, estimate the energy consumption. So two other approaches were used. First, from the CCA data, the value of 35.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter per annum was used to estimate with the volumes for the 607 cold stores to estimate the energy consumption. And then another study, Evans et al. 2013, showed that SEC actually varied with the cold store volume, and the relationships are as seen in the graph here, and the equations were derived for those relationships, and they were also used together with the volumes to estimate the energy consumption. So comparing the results for the different approaches to, we have with the original average SEC from the 2015 paper, we have 50.2 and 66.2 for 50.2 for chilled, 66.2 for frozen and mixed cold stores, and that estimated the annual energy consumption as 3.43 terawatt hours. With the SEC per unit area values from the BEES report, we arrived at a slightly lower electricity consumption of 2.95 to 3.27 terawatt hours. Then using the CCA estimated average SEC of 35.5, the electricity consumption was 2, and varying SEC with volume approach produced an electricity consumption of 2.25. With the electricity consumption, we could then estimate the scope 2 emissions, and then also the scope 1 emissions. And what we would note perhaps from this is that the average, the values of 2 and 2.25 are broadly in line in what you would expect for 607 cold stores compared to the 450 and the from the CC Cold Chain Federation data, which we know the consumption for. So on a pro rata basis, that is about right. The Pearson in 2019 suggested a typical SEC for cold stores over the last 25 years was 30 kilowatt hours per meter cube per annum, but with wide variation between stores. But more recent energy monitoring data suggested SECs in the UK are now more in the region 8 to 20 kilowatt hours per cubic meter per annum, well, at least in the newest and largest stores. And a best practice curve was proposed as shown on the right here. What we aim to do in the project is to develop a benchmarking tool for cold stores, which would involve collecting data on annual energy consumption and volume for as many cold stores as possible in the UK. The data would be anonymized and treated confidentially, and we could, with that data though, we could then define low energy use of best practice and average and high energy user bands, and we would be aiming to produce a benchmark chart, something like shown on the left here, and then using that individual cold store operators could check their energy performance and by comparison with a benchmark. So the data required for benchmarking is already being collected for CCA cold stores through the Cold Chain Federation scheme, but more data is needed, particularly for the cold stores which aren't in the CCA at the moment. And cold stores can already check their energy performance against best practice through the STAR refrigeration app. But with this project, we aim to develop a more detailed benchmarking tool, including other factors such as the age of the cold store, whether it's chilled, frozen or mixed, what refrigerant used, and refrigeration equipment. Also, we plan to evaluate new technologies that could help improve energy efficiency and reduce emissions. So if you want more information about this or would be willing to share your cold store energy performance data, which, as I say, would be handled confidentially and anonymized, then you can contact me, and that's my email address. And there's some other references used. Okay.
Thank you, Gareth, for all that detail. So we will be sending a recording. I know there's a lot in there, so we'll be sending that out to you afterwards. So we're going to pass now on to Dermot, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the work he's been doing to incite investigations to really identify where those savings opportunities are. So Dermot, we'll just swap over to you, and Lisa will move your slides forward for you. So off you go, Dermot. Thanks.
Thank you, Miriam. My piece of work is actually providing input to Garrett's data. In other words, finding out energies in surveys, so to see if the information gathered in is actually correct, but also looking at the opportunities of what we can do with existing cold stores to get to net zero in by 2050. Next slide, please, Lisa. Now, where do we visit? Well, for this aspect of the work, our plan was to visit 10 sites. We've actually gone to 11 sites because one of the clients wanted us to go to 2 of his sites rather than 1. But as you can see, it is a variety. So it's freezers, chilled, and in multiple temperatures. So some of them are external box, high, what I mean by high could be 35, 40 meters. Low is typically below 20 meters. Some of you might say 20 meters is low, but that seems to be the new norm nowadays for a low build. But in the older ones, a low could be anywhere from 6 to 10 meters, and in cases even down to 4 meters. But then there was a variety of different types of refrigeration systems, from direct pumped ammonia to an LPR system to HFCs. And for the chill store, there was glycol, and in some cases, and also CO2. So there is actually a variety of refrigerants around. So it wasn't just a few sites picked. I was really aiming for a big variety to get a understanding across the whole industry. Next slide, please. So what about using technology? Well, what I'm actually finding, the refrigeration industry is very good at buying technology and the latest technologies. If they know what's out there, they're willing to buy it. So compressor inverters, condenser fan inverter, or gas cooler inverters, pumps, and buying the latest efficient compressors. The industry is very good at buying them. But one of the challenges is when you come in to buy like evaporators and air cooled inverters, they've been buying them, but the industry is just running them as a fixed speed fan. So if you buy a bit of technology and you treat it like an AC fan, you're not actually going to get the benefit, because the reality is all you should have bought is the right AC fan. So if you're going to buy something like an AC fan, you need to actually use a speed control and increase it, because you're dealing with the cube law on fan speed. And principally, the majority of places where EC fans are installed in evaporators and air coolers, they're not being used. And I hear there's challenges with those because they don't work. Well, you must control things with systems, not as individual coolers. You must control them as a system. But controls is another major issue. How do we get our refrigeration plants to perform very well? Well, you need to control it as a system and not individual components. Now, the control systems, while they might be new and fancy names, they're still based and controlling on 20-year-old principles and not using modern controlling technologies. It is down to software and control. The technology is already there. The technology has been there the last 40 years, but it's how we actually, it's not new, but it's actually implementation. And again, is when it comes to optimization, there's now excellent optimization systems coming in, which work very effectively. There's systems where people can go online, oh, our condensing pressures are getting high compared to where they should be. And those systems really, when you look at plant, it's running very, very efficiently. So more optimization type systems that tells you when it's out of optimization is the way to go. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about experience. I've visited 11 sites. I'm going to talk about 2 sites. Yes, they might be to the one extreme, but it's kind of showing what's happening in the industry. Well, there was a site with multiple cold stores, and in 2 of the cold stores and 1 blast freezer, they've changed out from which plant was originally R22 converted, and then they got the plant replaced on the sites to R448. Now, they purchased high quality components. So because it's condensing units, they purchased a nice branded condensing unit, and the same thing with evaporators. But the challenge is when they started assembling the systems together now, and that is down to the contractor. Now, an example, when I went to site, it was 14-degree ambient, but the condensing temperature was 43 degrees C. And when you analyze a system, the reason is it was running at 43 because when they would actually reduce the condensing pressure, they would get flash gas going to the evaporator expansion valve, and they had problems with it. So they elevated the condensing pressures. And the reason is, all of this is they actually never installed a liquid subcooler. It might be a cheap component. It isn't an expensive component to put in, but they never installed it, saving a bit of money. And that was one of the big reasons. And then, but what was the outcome of this? Well, since the new refrigeration systems were put in 2021, and you look at your energy data, and this site were very fortunate, they had energy data, their energy consumption had gone up to 31%. Now, you'd expect with new refrigeration equipment going in, it would be more efficient. But they actually never got their CCA target, and was actually all down to because the plant they put in wasn't efficient. But also the other thing that really kind of bought it is there was no F-gas logs on site, and also the new plant wasn't CE marked. So in other words, we have in this particular site unscrupulous contractors putting in equipment that is against standards, against regulations, and actually would never be running energy efficient. Next slide, please, Lisa. So then went to the other extreme, went to a very large multiple temperature distribution center. Now, this place, give you a background on the customer, he wants the most efficient system put in, willing to pay the money, even paying consultants to write specifications for them. But when you actually, and so there was an ammonia freezer and glycol in the chill areas, and it chose glycol in the chill areas because of safety. Again, good quality components were purchased. Everything had the buzzwords. You had inverters on pumps, EC fans, and all the buzzwords were used with high technology. So the technology was there. But when you look at the operating parameters, it was 12.5 degree ambient, condensing temperature 24. But this was an evaporative condenser. There's no reason on that day you couldn't be at least having evaporating temperature 20 degrees C. But the challenge is actually when it went on a defrost, it went up to 28 degrees C on the cold store coolers. And that was like for a few hours every day. So, and as you're aware, anybody in this call, every 1 degree higher condensing pressure is approximately 3 degrees or 3% more energy. But also when you looked at what was running is majority of the evaporator and cooler fans were running all the time, even though there was no requirement. The load was low. An example of the coolers was only a requirement for 6 cooler fans 6 coolers were actually running in refrigeration mode, but 18 coolers fan sets were running. And the evaporators, I never saw them stopped. And the most I ever saw on site running was 3 out of 8, but yet they were all running full speed. So in other words, heat was being put into the store. So there's probably one less evaporator and one less cooler needed to run. But it isn't just that. The heat you put into a store, you must also take it back out. But again, there was EC fans put in. Again, the lovely buzzword EC fans, not been used, running at fixed speed. So in other words, you put its technology is there, but it's actually not being used. It's the control system uses technology. Then there was booster fans installed. About 40 kilowatts worth were running when I was on site. In reality, someone was a bit concerned that they mightn't get the airthrow, and they said, "Oh, I'll put in booster fans." But the reality is, if they had any experience with CFD modeling, they'd have realized, well, the existing coolers easily got to the doors, and you actually don't need a booster fans. And CFD modeling actually tells you actually that they upset the airflow and should only be used in corners of a room or a dead spot where a normal fan can't blow towards. So in other words, turn them off, take them out. They weren't even needed, but they're running 40 kilowatts of fan power. Then when it comes to pumps, there was only 6 coolers running, but yet they had 64 kilowatts of pumps. It should have been below 20, probably more like 15. I've been quite generous giving a 20 kilowatts. So in other words, more excessive power. And then what really, really annoyed me is when I came to the ammonia evaporators for the freezer. Well, they put hot gas into the coil, but it was electric tray. The hot gas is there. It literally costs very little more investment. I'm talking about tiny amounts to actually put hot gas into the trays, and it would have used no extra energy. Instead of running 12 kilowatts for 40 minutes twice a day for each cooler, they wouldn't have to use it at all. It would be free heat available. And also the same was for the glycol air coolers. They were defrosting warm glycol, but they put electric trays in again. So in other words, why did they actually do it? But then the power metering was installed, but it wasn't working. So while it was there, it was actually adding no benefit. That means whoever was maintaining the plant wasn't actually using or looking at the power metering, because you'd have expected on a plant that's 2021 for power metering to be working. Next slide, please. So what was the outcome? Well, some of it you can deal with control, and you can actually reduce the power consumption by implementing control items. And that is like the EC fans, turning off all these fans, getting down to condensing pressure. But there's at least another 10% of it you can never get back without actually changing piping and changing air coolers. So really what I'm highlighting here, there is a real challenge of someone willing to pay probably £5 million for a refrigeration plant, but yet something is put in inefficient. Next slide, please. So kind of looking at this and the other sites, well, again, it's going to a site no F-gas logs. Actually, both sites that went to F-gas had with HFC said no F-gas logs. Typically, I'm finding condensing temperatures are elevated, and it's typically about 4 to 5 degrees. So without doing much, just by going around to majority of the sites, probably 8 out of the 11 sites, just by adjusting condensing pressures and tweaking stuff, you could probably make a 15% saving on compressor power alone. Now, when you actually start asking questions about energy, well, there is very few of them actually monitoring their energy to the refrigeration systems. Now, if you're not monitoring the energy to the refrigeration systems, well, how can you actually talk to a refrigeration contractor about energy and reducing down and improving efficiency if you don't know what it's using? You know where to benchmark it by. So when Gareth talks about benchmark, he's talking about industry benchmark. But if you actually don't understand what's happening in your own site, how can you make improvement? And on the maintenance logs, no mention of energy efficient. So when you ask the question, what do you consider a good contractor? It's all about the system is running reliable. So there is an issue here, is the client doesn't know what is actually happening with his own plant. And on site, I'm even finding the people on the site don't even know what the electricity bill for the site is. So there's nobody kind of driving energy efficiency on the sites. Now, also, when I'm just talking about the inside of the box, cold store inside the box are generally very good condition. Chilled stores, mostly good, but the big challenge with chilled store is air coming through doors on 2 of the 11 sites. Next slide, please. So from going around, it kind of leads to the question is, I'm not concerned about technology because the refrigeration industry is very good at implementing it. What I'm concerned about is how we get from where we are to the future. And it's kind of training within the industry. So first of all, we need training because people need to understand about energy efficiency and how to make a plant operate more effectively. And even these new sites, you've technicians going around, but they should be seeing this and questioning, saying, why is this plant running inefficiently? Why is the condensing pressures high? Is regulation required? Well, how do we actually go? We haven't changed what we've done the last 15. We've all talked about net zero, but we haven't actually changed. We're not actually CE marking plants. We're not doing F-gas regulations. So how do we actually move forward to it? And then when it comes to new plant, well, why are we putting in inefficient systems? It's down to design. It's how the controls go in. So do we need designers to be trained? Do you need qualifications? How do you make sure that you're actually a good plant? The £5 million plant is the customer was willing to pay the money, and they didn't get what they were looking for, but they didn't realize still what they had. And then is, well, do you blame the end user? I kind of go as well. I can't get somebody who's good at moving pallets to be a refrigeration expert. So really it needs to come from within the refrigeration industry to drive to net zero, because the end users will never be experts. But they need people who they can trust. So really for me, it's how do we change the culture within the industry? So there's lots of questions I have here. And this is something which there's a survey out that Kat has talked about earlier. Please bring forward, fill in that survey, and then talk to us and give your opinions how you think the industry should be changed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dermot, for sharing that work. You say it's very much work in progress. So if I'd like to ask all of our speakers to make sure they're all got their cameras on and we can have a little bit of a discussion. And we've also got Tom Southall from the Cold Chain Federation joining us as well for that discussion. So thanks to everybody joining us online for this talk on net zero refrigeration in cold stores. We've got a series of experts. We talked about measuring carbon emissions, all those impacts. Do you want, perhaps we can start, I've put you on the spot, Tom. What's your response to what you've heard so far today? Because you're representing, to a certain extent, those cold store owners.
Morning, Miriam. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for those presentations. Just for those that don't know me, Tom from the Cold Chain Federation. So we are the trade body representing businesses operating cold stores and fleets of refrigerated vehicles as well. Yeah, lots to digest in those two presentations. I feel Gareth's pain to some extent. You know, the work he's been doing is something we've been looking at for a couple of years, sort of trawling through data sources, trying to find the kind of most accurate view of number of cold stores, size, energy footprint, and that kind of stuff. And I've been down some of those kind of wormholes, like the valuation office data, thinking they look promising, and then they turn out to be, you know, quite, you know, not great for these purposes when you look into it. But yeah, really good to see some of those calculations to verify some of our own work. I guess what Gareth finished on there, sort of talking about benchmarking, that's the bit probably we're most interested in, I suppose, because that's something that, you know, the industry really needs, a way to understand where the energy they're using on their site compares to similar businesses, and that allows them to see some of the stuff, I guess, the step before Dermot was talking about where the room for scope and potential is. I suppose the good news on that sort of area is that for the last 2 years, the Federation has been working with our members to generate an energy benchmark, pretty much exactly as Gareth described. We've got the benefit of all of those businesses that contribute to the Climate Change Agreement Scheme reporting their individual data every year. So those approximately 450 sites, every year we get their energy data, we get the size of their cold store, the cooling space. And for the last couple of years, we've been using that to try and design exactly as described, a sort of benchmarking service. We've also been trying to ask additional information beyond what's required for the CCA to help us do that. So we've been collecting information on all of those sites, whether they're chilled or frozen. We've got some of information around the things that really affect energy performance and aren't that well reflected in the CCA, like renewable energy, blast freezing, which can really impact your kind of energy usage per volume. and also stuff on age of cold store and refrigerant and that kind of stuff. So we've been working for a couple of years. I'm really pleased to say that. So we mainly do that for a member-facing purpose. So we've been developing dashboards that show each member where they sit. We've created 6 cohorts with a measure of size and also whether they're majority chilled or frozen. We've been producing benchmarks to show where each site fits within their cohort, and then also the potential savings for cost, but also carbon emissions as well. Those have gone out to all those companies, and next week we'll actually be doing a bit of external facing work on that. So we're sort of publishing, if you like, what those 6 benchmarks are, providing a bit more information about how it's been put together over the last couple of years. So we'd like to share that with the team.
I was going to say, there's lots of information out there from what you're saying, the research you've been doing, the research from the team here. This project, they call it TICR, it's really about net zero refrigeration, is all about shining a light on areas where there isn't a lot of information. And yet Dermot's been telling us that, you know, with all this data, with all this really important net zero agenda, there's still lots of behavioral issues. So data collection is great because it gives you a starting point. It gives us, our colleagues in government, something to work with. But, you know, how are we going to get to that change if having that information isn't enough? I mean, Dermot, you talked a lot about training. But, you know, training is great as well, but there's a difference between training and behavior change. And it sounds as though there's something here which is more just about knowledge and information and more perhaps about behaviors. I mean, Dermot, do you think what you found so far, do you feel that's typical of the industry? Those, let's just say they were opportunities for improved savings, rather than, you know, it's not about industry bashing. It's looking for where we can make those savings to help everyone get to net zero. Between what you've done, what Tom's done, which you're aware of, what's your feeling?
My feeling is new systems can't be installed to be efficient if they aren't being designed by expert designers. And the challenge within the industry, we have people suddenly going from who's been a technician, received very little training, and can just about put in a system and know how it works. Then they're kind of designing something and they're depending on so many other people who's selling a product to them that they don't know what they're buying. And you get a system put in it and it just kind of works. And it's very much, some organizations have proper experts doing it, while there's other organizations and they just put in a system that works, but then it isn't efficient. And then when you put in a system, you're left live with it for 50 years. I know sites that are from 19 people. I hear the word, also, no cold store won't be efficient. Some 1970 cold stores are as nearly as efficient as modern ones. And it's down to even the old equipment put in 1970s. Yeah, there might be a 10% difference in performance, but the old buildings were just as good insulation as the modern buildings. So it's actually all down to how you actually design the system, because the technology is there. And if there's a new compressor, where the industry is brilliant, say, oh, there's a new type of this efficient item, let's put it in. We've been doing that for years and changing technology, but what we're not good at actually is implementing technologies together. And a lot of it is down to controls and down even simple pipe sizing. People guess this stuff. They haven't a formal training and system, but the challenge is even if you go to a college, none of the lecturers have probably gone into a detailed design of an industrial ammonia system. And so you're kind of you're really starting from a low point, but in a way, it needs, in a way, in my opinion, there is needing of regulation all the way from a technician to beef up their expertise, to then companies having to make sure they pay for their technicians. But because at the moment there isn't an even keel across the industry, nobody wants to train people, because if they train them, they might leave and go to another company. So you're in this kind of catch-22. If you invest a lot of money in training, well, they'll just move on to another company, get paid more money. The whole industry needs to start investing in training, and then eventually, I know we'll go eventually more money down to end users who has refrigeration equipment, But at the end of the day, they'll actually save money because the refrigeration plants will run more efficiently. So it's kind of, it will sort, in other words, it won't cost them any more in the long run, but they might have to pay the refrigeration contractor more initially.
I mean, what do you think, Kat, from your point of view of how the project is shaping up, and you're looking at lots of different sectors as well? Are these common issues that are coming up, this issue around lack of training or lack of knowledge of how to make sure those systems that are installed are working well? Because it strikes me that we need some really good, I mean, maybe Tom's already got some good case studies of where it is working well, because it's easy to get negative about what's not working. But, you know, there must be some really great places out there that people can learn from, where they get the training, where they get the knowledge, they get the controls right. I mean, what's your thinking of what you're seeing from the project?
So, funnily enough, I was actually replying to Lawrence on the chat, because what Dermot found with the surveys on cold stores is very similar to what was found with data centers. So it shows these systemic issues with design and maintenance, and the lack of focus on energy efficiency. So I think this is across the board for the industry, and part of the reason why we're doing the survey. But in terms of highlighting the best case studies, you know, show what good performance is, I think that's a very good point. And maybe this is something that we will look to do and include in our roadmaps, you know, show what's the best that can be achieved. But in order to do that, we really need data. This is where we can have the industry support us and you know, show us those good case studies, and we'll definitely, we want to promote it. You know, we want to promote what good looks like.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting learning then, if it's not just good enough to have some case studies where a really expert designer who has been well trained or who's experienced or whatever has worked closely with a customer to get a great project. You actually have to have those case studies that shows how you changed behavior in the customer to make sure they are managing that energy and make sure they are looking for the net zero rather than just doing the minimum, if you like. I guess I can put Tom on the spot again. You know, you must be working with a lot of people in your technical groups and your members who are keen to achieve net zero, who feel the opportunities are there, who are putting in the best stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really encouraged in how much operators do want to, you know, get to whatever net zero means for the cold chain. But I think Dermot's highlighted some really important areas. I think that lack of perhaps knowledge, exactly as you said, Dermot, you know, people that move pallets around aren't experts in refrigeration systems. I think it is changing a little bit in the sense that, you know, energy prices have been very high. We're seeing more in our members, people, energy professionals coming in to kind of try and understand energy usage and put some of these things in place. But I think there's still a lot more to do, and we've seen that in the climate change agreement scheme, that efficiency has been really good, and it's still good, but it is starting to tail off in terms of the improvement year on year the industry is making. That's possibly because some of the more obvious things that people can think of, like changing lights, you know, all those sorts of things have been done, and it is some of this quite, you know, technical stuff that now needs to be looked at. And I think Dermot's raised some really important questions that well, it'd be great to raise some of the important research he's done over the last few months to our members, and obviously get their sort of feedback and stuff. So look forward to supporting that survey.
Yeah, I mean, I've got lots of questions about the drivers for change, because this stuff came up within the talks, and you know, whether, you know, legislation is the only way to make change happen. You know, this is a DESNZ sponsored project, so we have an opportunity to perhaps highlight where we would like to see government supporting our industries to achieve the net zero, because standards are already there. And certainly from the previous talk we had, you know, they're talking about standards, codes of practice not being applied. Net zero objectives are already there. Cost of energy was really high, and that was a massive driver as well. So, you know, there's, you know, what else is needed? Any thoughts, anyone, on policy? I mean, I don't know, again, trying to bring Gareth in, do you, from the work you were doing, were you seeing any trends that the energy costs may have had an impact? So you're still on mute, you might just need to unmute yourself. Is there anything about energy costs? Are there other drivers? Did you see any trends in the work you were doing?
Well, yes. I mean, it's. I mean, there are definitely influences the various factors which influence the energy use are particularly the age of the cold store. The newer cold stores tend to be the most efficient, having the latest energy installed in them, and also monitoring. I think is really important to know exactly where you are using the energy. I mean, it's just the same as the smart metering suggested in your home. It is actually, you know where the energy is being used, it's likely to bring your attention towards what you should be doing to try and reduce your energy use. But I mean, and that's the key to reducing your emissions.
Yeah, and particularly for new systems where, I guess the customers are hoping they're going to be more efficient in a new system, but if Dermot said sometimes they're not getting those savings, then they've got to have the monitoring in to show. Otherwise, they really wouldn't know.
Mary, what I do know is even if you're an accountant, you hear about accountants, they want to get the lowest cost of investment. If you can demonstrate to an accountant, you will get a payback. They will invest the money. So the issue here isn't actually that companies are willing to invest in technology. They are willing to invest in technology, but the industry is competing against each other, and it's probably getting to a point is where they're putting in the lowest cost and trying to find the lowest cost of putting something in. But the issue is when the customer is buying it, they don't realize what they're buying. And because it's technical, and what the people in the coaster industry are brilliant at is moving boxes, pallets. That's what they're experts in. They're not engineers. They might have an engineer on board, but then you'll find out is that he'll probably be a general engineer without refrigeration expertise and be learning a bit, and is then talking to a technician out in the field who hasn't had actually any training, and that person then eventually is selling a refrigeration plant, and he's not training, and it kind of works all the way up. That they just buy something.
So are you arguing for a mandatory code of practice on energy efficiency for new systems, something like that, which is not just about design, but actually the efficiency? I mean, Tom, what do you think? How would your members think about that, a mandatory efficiency standard on new systems?
I guess I'd need to fully understand how that would impact on their sort of purchasing, I guess, and obviously cost comes into play in some of these things. I think you mentioned policy. I think what I think the industry really appreciate is that you mentioned that there were net zero goals in place, and obviously we've got net zero by 2050, and there's some other goals. What we're not too sure is what the kind of energy efficiency targets will be for the next couple of decades for cold stores, but lots of industries. So the CCA scheme has been the big determinant of that, but at the moment that only runs up to 2024. We've got a target to hit for 2024, and then there's nothing beyond that. I think there's a big question about what a net zero cold store actually looks like, and that's something we're working with Dermot and others to try and understand. But cold store is always going to use energy. Obviously, that can be gained from renewables and things like that. But I think the industry really appreciate that kind of long-term view of how we need to improve efficiency year on year, and then obviously some of the things like Dermot's describing there can fit in quite nicely to that. I suppose a little bit like the phase down for F-gas, I suppose, in that you've got that long-term view of this is how it's going to change. The CCAs are a very well established and popular policy for kind of supporting that reduction, and it's done so far. So we'd like to see that continue as well.
Yeah, because that's got the targets, which I know Kat and the team are looking on roadmaps to get some targets. But with the things like F-gas or CCA, you've got legislation, incentives, or requirements behind that. So you've got the two working together. So that's quite an interesting thought about how it all interacts. I think as we're running a little bit over on time, I'm going to ask Katerina for a final, maybe some final comments on what you've heard today. Anything coming out today that was different from your expecting, or anything about how the project's going to work that's influenced by this talk?
I think it was a really interesting presentation. I'm really glad to see so many people in the audience. I think what's become clear, it would be great to work with you, Tom, with the Cold Chain Federation, both on benchmarks, but we have been doing some modeling on how cold stores can get net zero by 2050. So it'd be great to share that data with you. And really, I just welcome every support from the industry. Maybe a call for case studies, show us your best performing cold store. I really will welcome that information.
Yeah.
And I thank you all for coming to the TICR Talk. We have another one next week, which is going to be focused on retail.
Yeah, I think Lisa's gonna give us an idea of the future talks that are coming up. So it doesn't stop here. We've got lots of talks coming on different topics, but also as she said, there's in the survey there, we're trying to get views from people about what the drivers are, where you want to see change in the industry, whether it's, from what Dermot was saying, whether it's in how the contractors work or whether it's how the end users work. Really interested. We're getting a couple of points in the chat now that we won't have time to discuss, but do put any comments in the chat as well, because we can download that. TICR project is very much work in progress. It's still early days, initial findings. So we've got lots of opportunities for you, the industry owners and designers, to contribute. So even if you're more involved in smaller cold stores or other aspects, really interested in knowing your views. So survey, if the survey doesn't work for you, drop us a line and we'll try to involve as many people as possible, and hopefully see you at the next TICR Talk as well. I think we're going to just then thank again our speakers for sharing their work in progress. All of this will eventually become public in various reports, roadmaps, benchmarks, and things like that, but still really just working through it. So lots of opportunities to influence the outputs of the program, and hopefully the program will influence the industry and its future drive to net zero as well. So thank you once again to everybody, and to Lisa in the background for keeping us all on track, and look forward to hearing from you in the future. So thanks very much, and keep in touch. Thank you.